Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our DevTalk presentation today. The discussion today is about RFID. Uh, this is your presenter and host, Ritesh Gupta. I'm here on the call with Dino Gregorich as well. In this DevTalk today, I'm going to provide you with an RFID overview. Some of the application and development paths, which are available from Zebra Technologies, and kind of give you enough data and details to kind of, get your feet wet into the world of RFID. This session is meant to be, very informal, and so as we go along, if you have any questions, please do type them on GoToWebinar, and we'll address them, as either at the end or as we go through the presentation. Now, for our discussion today, I'm going to start out, giving you a background on basics of, what RFID is, how it really is becoming a game changer in the market space. Then, I'll touch on, what the Zebra's RFID portfolio is, what are some of the new things that we have done or we are working on from our side. We'll talk about how applications are built within for RFID. We'll cover what are some of the APIs and components and such that Zebra provides, and we'll end out with some of the places where you can get additional information and things like that, right? Okay, so to start out with, so what is RFID? RFID is radio frequency identification, and essentially RFID is a data capture technology which uses radio frequencies to capture the data from the RFID tag. Essentially, when you think about how it works from that standpoint, right? You have a RFID reader, which can either be a fixed mounted reader or it could be a handheld reader, which essentially transmits out radio frequencies, electromagnetic energy, which essentially wakes up a tag. There are two types of tags, which are out there. There is an active tag, there is a passive tag, and this tag essentially, when it receives that electromagnetic energy, right, or that radio frequency, it essentially wakes up, and then it responds back by sending a data, which is embedded in that tag over the radio waves, back to the reader, right? Now, essentially, once that data is received by the reader, now that reader can act upon that data, be it essentially use that data to look up a record, or essentially push that, back into the respective business application, right? And just like how you would think of, how the barcodes work, right? Essentially it's the same kind of a concept that you have this data, which enables you to look up any relevant information, right? For your business application. Now, from the RFID side of things, the good thing or the neat thing about RFID is that it essentially allows the user to capture data in bulk, right? Compared to how the barcode scanning would work, right? You can essentially, the user can do bulk data capture, and that of course enables them to be able to be more efficient, be able to reduce their labor cost, increase their productivity, and importantly increase the accuracy of how they are capturing that data. This is certainly beneficial, as it compares to the barcode scanners as an example, right? This is all of the data from the RFID side of things, is captured much more faster and quickly. Now, if we look at the barcode scanning, the traditional barcode scanning, and RFID side by side, the key thing with the barcode scanning is that you have to be standing in front of the barcode scanner, right? The barcode has to be visible to the barcode reader itself, or the barcode scanner. The user can only scan one barcode at a time, and if the barcode is damaged, right, then there are challenges that happen beyond that, right, because of course the scanner will not be able to read it and things like that. On the other side, with RFID, technology, many different items and tags can be read in one shot. You can have a much broader range. You can have unique item identification. We'll talk about this in a few minutes as to what that unique item identification means. Specifically, given if you have a collection of all the different RFID tags, how to be able to separate out specific tags and such. The RFID tags are much harder to deface, right? Because unless until you break the specific chip, which is on that tag, I mean, the chances of the corrupted or damaged tag is very low. Now, the other thing also, from RFID perspective, is that RFID tags can be secured, so they can be, of course, they can be read and written by a reader. And because they can be secured, it makes it much harder to, replicate them as well, right? So it essentially enables, that level of security from the tag side of things, right? Even, in fact, even on the data side of things, right? So no one can essentially read that data, or just can essentially see that if there is anything that they can capture out of it. Now, the point here is that barcode scanning and RFID, it's not one or the other, right? Most of our customers, and many customers, in fact, use both of the technologies side by side, right? There is both advantages to both barcode scanning as well as RFID from that standpoint. Now, when I look at where RFID plays a huge role, right? We've seen that RFID has a huge role in retail. We've seen from our customers that RFID technology has enabled the associates to be able to find items for customers easily, be able to do a much better inventory control, be able to find the stuff on the floor much more quicker and faster, and such. Also, if I can give you an idea into some of the trends and where things have gone for RFID, we've seen that there is a lot of adoption going on for RFID technology, right? Specifically from tier 1 to tier 2 companies. We've also seen better ergonomics, better devices, software, and tools which are now coming up for RFID-related technologies. RFID also is now being utilized for locationing kind of components, right? And we'll talk about more in a second here, where we've seen, where customers have actually used RFID as the baseline in being able to track assets, being able to track, the movement of those assets as well. Another interesting trend, that we've seen on the RFID side is also the close gap, or the closing of the gap from the IoT side of things. And what that means is that if you think of each one of the tags which is out there as a thing, right? RFID essentially enables that capturing of all of these tag information out there, right? And becomes that low-level component of being able to get access to data very, very quickly. Now, I talked about locationing side of things. I'll go into what some of the Zebra portfolio is, but the intention, or I'll give an example where we saw recently, how RFID tags were being utilized. This was actually in a hospital environment where the patient's bed had were enabled with RFID tags, and so as the patient's bed would go through the hallways within the hospital, the tags would read where that location of that bed and that patient was, and the system was able to essentially determine at any given point where that patient was. We have also seen examples of RFID being used in automation, in manufacturing kind of environment, where in this particular example of this customer, they were looking to see how many times a particular tool was taken out of a drawer. And so they had put RFID tags on each one of their tools, and anytime the drawer would be open, and the system would essentially calculate with the reader which was on the drawer, it would essentially calculate that yes, this tool was being removed, from that drawer.
Hey, we have real quick. Should there be other slides? We're still on the first slide.
Oh, we are. Hang on. Yeah. Let me see what happened there.
Because yeah. But there we go. We see that.
Uh-oh. Okay. My apologies, everyone. We didn't realize that go to webinar was actually still stuck on the first one. Okay. Well, so all the good stuff now is essentially still on the future slide. So hopefully, so far you guys are still keeping up with me. But as I was giving the other example here, in the retail side of things, we've seen examples where customers have used RFID for asset tracking, and especially by asset tracking I mean by that the inventory tracking, right? So in this one example, this particular retailer was used for putting RFID tags on the different apparel, right, and high-end merchandise. And so essentially, when the worker is looking for a specific product, right, they would essentially just walk through the floor with their mobile RFID device and are able to track and capture, where, that particular, item is located within the entire store. So what I'm getting at is that, these are just few different examples, right, where we've seen, RFID being implemented, where, where different technologies have utilized, the RFID capabilities. Okay, let me switch across into, some of the things that, Zebra provides, right, and, kind of dive into that a little bit, and then, we'll look at some of the neat things that we are doing that, as you as developer might find it helpful as well. So from Zebra perspective, we have the largest portfolio for the RF and sensor-based technologies, right? So we have, the passive side of passive tag solutions as well as the active solutions. So we have our mobile computing side of things, where you can have a mobile computer which is enabled with RFID reading capabilities. We also have fixed readers. We also have the locationing side of things, which essentially enables the real-time locationing of where a particular asset is and such. If I was to look at it, from an overall portfolio perspective, right? So you will see that on the top we have the fixed readers. Now these readers, they of course can be mounted into the ceiling. So something like FX9500, it has 8 different antennas, that it can connect up into. We have the handheld readers, right, which essentially enables the worker to be mobile and be able to capture the RFID tags on the floor and such. We also have an entire portfolio of RFID tag printers, and I'll go into a little bit of a detail about a new technology that we are coming up with, something called Silverline. But essentially, these printers are your workhorses, right? That can print RFID labels, right? They can, and these labels can, go pretty small, from that perspective. From the size perspective, we also have, the UHF card printers, right? Which can essentially enable, ID cards or any just regular cards, with RFID capabilities. We have a full host of antennas, that can essentially, of course, attach out, with the fixed readers for data capture. Now, from an application development side of things, right, and I think that's where we really need to look at is that, so Zebra supplies the printers, the readers, the antennas, the accessories, and the development toolkits, right? We also have the UHF ID badge tags and things like that, right? Now, that's the overall portfolio, but we work with our tag partners, right? Who provide the tags. Now, they can be paper labels, they can be laminated, they can be encased tags, or any other type of specialty tags, for any different type of application, right? And then from the application standpoint, right? We work with our ISVs and of course the developers here on the call to provide the middleware and integration with backend systems and software applications, right? So that's how the entire overall ecosystem comes together, especially when you look at the different components. We'll talk about, from a development perspective as to what are the things that you can write applications towards, and we'll go through that in just a few minutes. From the from the UHF reader side of things, we have the industrial class as well as the business class. The industrial class, I would say, these both between the two of these, we cover everything, from the manufacturing floor to the retail, as well as giving the capability and the visibility to the back-end IT administrator and such. On the industrial class side, we have the FX9500 reader, as well as on the handheld side, the MC91 Workout Pro. I'll talk about RFID 8500 in a second, and the two-piece sled solutions, right? Which can essentially encompass, a Zebra MC67 device, or in case of a RFID 8500, which can essentially take on, an iOS or another Android type device, right? And I'll give you more details on that as well. On the business class, which is generally, what you would see in a retail store or in healthcare or, in the front of the store kind of situation, we have the portfolio of FX7500. Again, this is a fixed reader. We also have the hands-free scanner, which is the DS9808, right? Which has the RFID boot at the bottom, what you can see here, and then the different handheld devices, which can be used for mobile data scanning as well. Now, I talked about RFID 8500. This is one of the latest additions into our portfolio, from the RFID side of things, and this is essentially a two-piece solution. And in this, you can have the sled, or essentially this unit essentially combines with the device, via Bluetooth. So you can essentially tap or connect the device via Bluetooth, make it RFID enabled instantly, right? So this device can be, an Apple device or an iOS device or a Android device or Windows device, or whatever the case may be. You can also use this particular unit without the device, which means that the device can be in the worker's pocket or whatever the case may be, and just use this component for being able to do quick data read and such. Now, from the software side of things, and we'll go into that in details in there as well. We provide something called a 123 scan utility, which essentially enables you to configure, how this unit can be programmed. We also have something called ZETI, Zebra Easy Text Interface, which essentially can be used to take the data that comes from the RFID read side of things and provide that to your application. So there is no programming then that has to be done, right? Essentially, it would come in as kind of like a head data, that your application can essentially consume. This device, of course, you can read that it is a Class 1 Gen 2 device, right? And it has also enhanced Gen 2 V2 device here as well. Now, from the printer side of things, Zebra has, of course, a pretty vast portfolio on the UHF RFID side of things. There, essentially, we start out, from our card printers to our desktop printers, all the way to our industrial printers, right? That can essentially, based on what the requirement is of the customer, that these are they can go into different directions. The thing that I would like to highlight, which is something new, is something called Silverline that Zebra is coming up with, and this essentially enables the on-metal RFID tagging. And so when you think about the RFID tag on a metal, it's the challenge is that the radio frequency cannot differentiate very easily between what the data is coming back or it can actually get diffracted by the metal behind it. Now, we of course have seen a big demand from our customers to be able to put RFID tags on tools and on assets, as well as medical equipment. As an example, right, we had one particular customer who was looking to put RFID tags on surgical instruments, right? So before they go into operation theater, right, they can essentially calculate, what stuff was there and do an inventory post and such, right? So we see that demand, of being able to do these small tags, metal tags that can go across. Now, so the thing with these this silver line or these flexible label-like tags is that they can they can essentially go directly on top of the metal, right? Now, I'll also show this another slide here as well. What Zebra solution here is that we are able to print these tags as well as encode them. So they can be attached to the tag to the asset instantly, right? So essentially just a peel and apply kind of like a model there. So the way this tag works is that there's a bit of a padding there, and so what the padding does is that it kind of gives it just enough ability to be able to differentiate that between the reader, between the metal asset and the tag, so that way there is visible, there is easy ability to be able to read that data back without any interference. One another interesting thing about the Zebra printers is that each one of these printers essentially checks to ensure that the tags were written properly, right? So there is a technology that's built into these printers that as the tags are coming out, it's all there is a reader which essentially ensures that that the tag is written appropriately as well. Okay, all right. So that was just the basic foundation of what the RFID is, what we have in the portfolio, and such on all of that good stuff. Now let's move into the development side of things, right? And which is really what interests us as developers. So on the when you're writing an application for for a RFID, when you're writing a RFID application, right? These are some of those steps that you follow in building your application, right? So the first step would be essentially connecting to the reader, right? This is where the reader can be a fixed reader or it can be the mobile reader. Be able to set up any of the events that the reader should be acknowledging, right? So when the essentially ensuring that the event handler is there for the reader to ensure that when the data is coming in, it knows what to do with it. Then set up any specific settings, for the antennas. Be able to set out any triggers. I'll actually show you some interesting things, that Zebra RFID computers are able to do. But you will specify that within your application. Then simply read the code, read the tag, and then just disconnect from the reader and dispose of any of the objects that you might have created, right? So it's a pretty simple, straightforward mechanism, to read the application. Nothing crazy on that. Now, when you think about the kind of applications that you can write with RFID, you can essentially create like a host-based application where your application is sitting on a desktop and it is essentially just reading data from just from a fixed reader kind of a thing. You can also have the same data come across from the mobile computer side of things, right? Going in this situation, the application is in fact sitting on the host, the PC there. But you can also have another mechanism where the application is essentially going or sitting on a mobile computer, right, and is able to take that data be it from the reader or the mobile reader, and extract that data and show that to the user on the mobile computer. The other type of application that you can also create is essentially based on what the scanner would provide into your host, right? So into your computer. So essentially, this would be done over a wired connection, right? That's a standard USB connection. But the only caveat here is that there is no support for RFID 3 or LLRP, right? And I'll give you guys an example, an overview of what LLRP is in a minute. Now, this was a host-based application, right? You can also create embedded applications, right? So what embedded application would be that in a mobile computer, that application is sitting on the device itself, where in this example, this is a Windows application, right? But you get my point that the application is on the device itself. But you can also have an application which is a headless application, and that's essentially sitting on the reader itself, right? So this is a capability that we provide for FX7500, where the application can be on the unit also. Now, I talked about LLRP here. Let me just give you a flavor of what LLRP is, and how it comes into play, and what Zebra is doing with that. LLRP stands for Low-Level Reader Protocol. This is essentially defined by the EPC global organization. Think of it as the open standard, which essentially prescribes how the communication would happen between the reader and an application, right? It's a message-oriented protocol. Basically, the message goes from the client to the reader about any of the configurations, about how it should be reading the tag and such, and then essentially a message goes back from the reader to the client, which talks about hey, this is how the reader is, any of the data it picked up, and all of that good stuff, right? Any of the Zebra devices, right? Be it the mobile or fixed reader, they are based on the LLRP protocol, right? So I'll talk about in a second as to from an application development perspective. I mean, you can create your application, which can essentially use or it can actually go directly to the LLRP protocol layer, or essentially use the what the Zebra layer is, and go through that. And we'll also look at why one would be advantageous versus another. So when you think of the Zebra application system, or the RFID system, at the core is the RFID server, right? Which is essentially running in the background. This is sitting on the reader. On top of it, you have the LLRP protocol, which we just talked about, right? So LLRP protocol essentially does that communication interface, right, between the reader as well as any of the application and such, right? And then on top of the LLRP protocol is what we have created, which is the RFID3 API set, right? And this API set is based on LLRP, and which essentially gives your application a very quick ability to be able to interface all the way down to the RFID server. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail here as to why is it advantageous to use the RFID3 API set versus the LLRP protocol. And you'll see the difference in a second here as well. Now, when you think about the LLRP reader interface here, essentially the LLRP protocol reads, it essentially talks to the Zebra readers, right? And what this thing allows to do is it allows to do connection management, be able to see how the reader, what kind of capabilities the reader has, be able to manage any events, be able to manage tags, set any filters, all of that good stuff, right? And be able to do any inventory or any access operations. Now let me turn it around and kind of show you the difference between the two, right? And how it might be beneficial as as you're writing your application in RFID to use one of these things, right? So as we talked, so at the very bottom you have the RFID reader server, which is sitting on the reader, and then on top of it is the LLRP protocol layer, right? Now remember, we talked about you can write an embedded application or you can write a host application. For both of them, essentially it's the same kind of architecture. Now what would happen is that you would have something called, you can write an application, LLRP application, right, which would essentially use the LTK toolkit to directly write against the protocol and write against the RFID server. Remember, I said that that LLRP essentially is just a messaging protocol, right? So you can write an application which will essentially allow you to do that directly. Now, what Zebra provides also is that you can create embedded, you can use the RFID API, right? Which will essentially go to the LLRP protocol and then go straight into the RFID server, right? So this is if you were to write applications in C. if you were looking to create an application in .NET, right, we also provide .NET APIs where you can use .NET to create your application, and it will work exactly the same way that the RFID3 API would talk to the LLRP protocol, and then go, that would essentially go talk into the RFID server. And then the same thing, we also provide Java APIs, right, which will essentially let your Java application, be it embedded or host, to be able to go directly, talk to the RFID3 API, and then go directly talk into the LLRP and talk into the reader, right? So many different choices, right? Just to summarize there, right? You can have your application written in Java, in .NET, or in C, and use the Zebra RFID3 APIs. If you don't want to use any of that, you can create a direct LLRP application, using the LTK toolkit, and then be able to go talk directly into the reader. Now we'll explore in a minute as to why would one be better or different than the other, right? But I talked about this RFID3. Let me talk a little bit more in detail as to what RFID3 API is, and how that is a little bit different, right? So the RFID API 3, is essentially provides a uniform set of APIs, right? For all the Zebra devices, all the Zebra fixed and handheld RFID devices, right? You can use the multiple readers. You can create very quick applications using this API set, right? And of course, it is available, for the different, be it for Java, .NET, or C. Now, the way this thing works is that, the RFID API essentially is sending the data over XML, over HTTPS, to RFID reader, right? The difference here is that, and at the same time, it's also sending the data back and forth between over LLRP, over TCP. So what the RFID3 API set essentially is allowing you to do is have a much tighter control over, what you can do with the reader, right? So you can essentially use RFID API 3 to be able to read tags, write tags, do locationing of tags, also in fact do the direction of the tags as well. Now, it's also the RFID API 3 is also able to do the LLRP functionality, which is the reader operation, and the reader operation is, getting an inventory of the antennas, and then also be able to do access operation, which is read, write the tags memory. Now, let's look at kind of like a side-by-side comparison of of a code, right? Especially from as you're writing your application, that's where it makes a big difference, right? So if you were to, let's say, write a simple application, right? Where you want to do an inventory, right, of the tags in and this is a very simple example, right? Where all you're doing, if you were using the RFID 3 API, all you have to do is open the reader and create the object for inventory and just do that perform, right? And then once you're done, just stop the inventory, right? Essentially just 2 lines of code. If you were to do the same thing with LTK, right, which you definitely can, there are a few additional steps that have to be done, right? So you'll have to first create a package, a message package, and within that message package that you will send to the LLRP, essentially it's the LLRP message to the server, where you would essentially tell it that, okay, enable the antenna, start reading the antenna, all of that stuff, right? And then when you're ready to stop doing the inventory, do the same thing, right? Stop, read out, disable, delete, all of that stuff. So what I'm getting at is that, I mean, just when you compare the two technologies, right, the LTK has a little bit extra complexity, right, where you have to do a little bit more work on that, right, than the RFID 3 API, right? I mean, you can certainly use each one of the technologies, but of course, the RFID 3 is a lot less complex, than the other way around. Now, I talked about the application, right? Let me give another example of what kind of application choices that you can do, right? So let's say if you're writing a host application, right? You're in that example, as we said, that host application can talk to the readers, the fixed readers. It can talk to the handheld. It can talk to any of the mobile readers, right? And in this example, again, as I was saying, that you have the choice of RFID API 3 or the LLRP, right? Similarly, the RFID, if there is an application that's sitting on the RFID mobile computer, it can essentially do a loop back, which what that means is that you are using the RFID reader on the device itself to read the tags and the data, as well as use that RFID mobile computer to read data from any other readers on other handhelds or any mobile handhelds, right? Similarly, if you have any non-RFID mobile computers, right, they can essentially also read data from the fixed readers as well as any other handheld readers, right? And my purpose here essentially was to show that you can essentially create your application in many different ways that essentially make sense to you, right? And you have that full choice and flexibility to be able to do so. Now, let's, I mean, since the developer talk, I figured that I'll, give you some example of a code, right? And in this particular case, I'm just going to look at, how quickly and easily that you can essentially create a very quick application for doing a simple inventory, right? Essentially, the very first step in your application code would be to establish the connection to the reader. By the way, this code that you're looking at, this is, of course, the RFID API 3 code, right? So what you see, the first thing I do is, essentially create an object, right, to connect to the reader, specify the IP address of the reader, go connect to it. Once I have connected to the reader, I essentially create a handler, event handler, right, which essentially says that, okay, when a tag is being read, to generate, to notify, my application of that. And then after that, just do a simple inventory read, right? In here, you'll see that, I start performing the read for the tag, right? And after read, the tags for 5 seconds. After that, just after the 5 seconds, stop reading. And once I'm done reading, disconnect the reader and close out my application, right? So the point here is that in literally, 7 lines of code, right, you can essentially embed RFID reading capability in your application, right? Now, this is, of course, the .NET example that I'm showing here, right? But you get the idea that it is, and as we talked about the anatomy of the application earlier, that you can very easily just, connect to the reader, set up any of the event handlers, do the read, and then, once you're done reading the data, that just essentially close out, do any cleanup and such, right? So pretty straightforward, from that standpoint. Now, switching gears, I want to, kind of give you an idea about some of the interesting technologies that, Zebra RFID readers are able to provide, right? And, I'm showing these few different examples, right? Just to highlight, some of the capabilities that you can do, with the Zebra readers, right? So, when you think about, in writing your application, or how the tags are placed, there is something called singulation, right? Where essentially, the location of the tag, or as you bring your reader to that tag, right, it essentially reads, what is in front of it, right? Now, this is, great if, you are looking to read, as many tags as you can write in front of it and such. Now, by the way, just to explain what singulation is, right? Essentially, singulation is the mechanism where the RFID reader identifies a tag with a specific serial number, right? So if you think of the fact that you have a number of tags that are available, right? It is essentially looking at the specific serial number for within those number of tags, right? Because now why is singulation a key thing? Because if you have all of these tags which are reading or sending that data back, right, and all of these multiple tags, when they respond back simultaneously to this reader reading that, it will essentially jam each other, kind of thing, right? And so what the Zebra devices are able to do is essentially as you're going through your inventory mechanism, right? You can essentially hang on. Actually, that's the example that I'm showing, right? So as you're moving along, right, you have read the first tag, right, first set of tags, and you want to be able to read the next set of tags, right? Now, when we enable singulation on the Zebra devices, what essentially happens is that the device would only read the tags that you're looking to read. And specifically, if you have read a particular tag, right, it will not read those tags again, right? So what this does is that it's much more efficient application, right? Instead of your application keeping track that, okay, have I read these 4 tags in this example before, and reading them again and going through that entire process again, then in that case, the singulation on the API side will essentially allow you to only look at the tags that you should be reading next. Now, the Zebra readers, they are also able to do something called pre-filtering, which is where your application says that, look, let's say if I have 20 tags that are available, right, or are in my vicinity, and I should be reading only the selected tags, right, or the selected location or sections of tags, right? It will essentially say it will only read those particular specific products, right, or those specific tags. And again, so this becomes advantageous from the fact that if you don't want to read the entire host of multiple different data points, right, you can only restrict out to the specific ones. Now, just like the pre-filtering, there is also post and access filter. And think of post filter as something which essentially gets applied after the tag has already been read, right? But it's not returned to the application. So essentially, the reader can do some manipulation there where, let's say it read all of the tags, right? So in this example, you will see that the reader read all of the tags, but it only made the certain tags available to your application, right? Again, the advantage there is that your application is now only looking at the reduced noise and only looking at the stuff that makes is relevant to your application and is relevant to what your business application is looking at. Now, there's this access filter that can also be applied, which can essentially provide any commands that should be applied at the reader level to be able to do some additional manipulation of that data as it comes in. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense, right? And again, if you have any questions or if you haven't followed that one, let me know, and I'll go through that one more time. Now, from if when you're looking for how to create the Zebra applications, any applications using the RFID tags, you can download these EMDKs from the Zebra support site. I created the bit.ly links, so that way it will be a little bit easier to remember where these are. So as I said earlier, right, we have the EMDK for C, we have the EMDK for .NET and for Java, where you can download these and essentially start building an application. When you download these the EMDK, right, you will also find essentially a .NET. You will find the reference guide, right, which will essentially include the some of the code snippets as well as instructions as to how you can create your application, right, for these things. There's also sample applications, which are included in there, right? So you can essentially use those sample applications, to kind of get a kickstart on your application. Okay, that's all I had on my side. Again, the whole intent of this presentation was, to kind of give you a very high-level introduction to RFID, some of the technology capabilities that Zebra has. Actually, let me just move back into this link, this page here, so you can write down the URL for these EMDKs. I would also say that if you run into any problems or if you're looking for any help or guidance and such, right, you also have access to the Zebra's developer community, which is at developer.zebra.com, where there's the host of information that's available there as well. Okay, so Dino, with that, how about we open up for some questions and see if there are any questions out there.
Right, there have been quite a few, and I've tried to answer a few as I can, but there are some outstanding questions. Not sure we can answer them all in this forum, but we can give it a try. I guess starting. We'll just start. The latest question was, what are the main differences between the FX 7500 and the FX 9500 readers? And that's the number of ports, right? Four ports for the 7500 versus 8 ports for antennas on the 9500.
Right.
There are probably some other differences as well, but if I recall, the FX 7500 also allows for your own applications to run on the actual device, versus 9500 does not support that. That's about it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we have, let's see, wow, more questions keep popping in. For Windows CE, do we know what JVM we support for the Java virtual machine for CE devices? I don't recall that version.
So just so I understand the question, so the question is, which JVM do we support for Windows and embedded handheld devices?
Yes.
I don't remember from the top of my head. Dino, can we please take the name down of the person who has asked the question, and we'll revert back to them?
Yes. So
unless someone else on the call, is aware of the answer. I don't remember it from the top of my head.
You see, tag ID. Question: does tag ID from the tag, just like a serial number, also represent the manufacturer of the tag? Is that true? So, does the unique tag ID include part of information regarding the manufacturer? I'm not sure that question either. Let's see. They're asking. Okay, there's so many questions. I don't know how we're going to get through them all, Ritesh. So we have the names of everybody, and we can probably respond to them. What do you want to? How do you want to handle that?
Well, let me look at some of the questions here really quickly, right? So the one question I do see is that, can I share my email? Sure. My email is ritesh.gupta@zebra.com, and please do email me if you have any questions. You can also find me on Launchpad or the Zebra developer community, and we'll be more than happy to answer anything there. Let me see what other questions. So actually, hang on. To the answer to the JVM question is, and Matthew Chu, thank you for that answer. We don't support JVM. CREM provides the JVM. IBM also has a JVM, but it's since the end of life. So again, any further details on that, Shak, we can take it offline with you for that. Okay, let's see. I see this question about what is the event handler do in this case. I'm not sure, what that question was related to. I'm assuming that was when I was showing the code example.
Yes.
Essentially, that was for getting the notification back, from the reader to be able to say that yes, okay, there is some action that's happening. Reader is coming back with the data. Now your application should be able to take that data and do something with it. Right. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just going up. VAP4. Okay, so this is an interesting question. So the question here is there a low frequency RFID Bluetooth reader? So Zebra does not currently support LF, low frequency or high frequency on mobile devices, only UHF, right? However, the
Well,
WAP4
yeah.
device does have low frequency support, right? So that that essentially can be used for that purpose. Okay, and oh, okay, sorry. Looks like you answered that question.
That's okay.
About which operating system WAP4 has. Let me see if I'm missing another question. Okay, hang on. There is a whole bunch of other questions that showed up. Folks, give us a second. We are trying to scroll up and down, through the list of questions kind of thing. Are there plans to move the iOS SDK to Swift, or will it remain in Objective-C? So for iOS, we don't necessarily provide a a SDK, right? We have essentially for the RFID 8500, which as I was saying is the Bluetooth enabled mobile reader. Essentially, there is something called ZTE, right? And the ZTE essentially gives you that data from the reader back into your application, as just how it would be, just a head perspective coming in, right? So you can, that's actually a lot more simpler because, then you don't have to worry about any of the stuff. You're just taking that data back in, within your application, right? So that's probably the easiest way. Okay. All right. Can we have RFID 8500 integrated with MC67? Yeah, absolutely. So the communication between the MC67 and RFID 8500 would be essentially over Bluetooth. Now, there is there is also a sled solution, that can be utilized, for MC67 there also. Let me see. The next question is. Has anyone used Cordova with ZTE?
I don't know.
I'll have to find out the answer to that. I thought I saw something, where someone had written something with that, but I'll have to find out the answer to that and come back to you.
Hey, the question regarding can we write more than 96 bits with the Zebra reader? The answer is yes. It really, but it depends on the actual tag itself. If the tag capacity is set for that, we've had to do write the 256-bit tags, even 512-bit tags. It just depends on the tag you're writing to. The reader and writer will be able to address that.
Okay. Actually, Dino, do you mind just reading the question really quickly so the audience knows what?
Is it possible to write more data than 96 bits with a Zebra reader? We have an opportunity to lead with a write of 40 characters.
Ah, okay.
So the answer is yes.
Yep. All right. Next question is, can you please share the metal new possibility slide once again? Absolutely. You will find more details on this if you also go to Zebra's website. This is called Silverline, and essentially, this is the ability to be able to put the metal, the RFID tag on metal. So let me just go back to that slide, and I'll show that one here.
And Ritesh, once you finish that slide, we're running out of time. We have some other things to do at top of the hour, so we're going to have to wrap up. Okay.
Okay. Not a problem, and okay, so that's the slide. And folks, I know we are running out of time, so you have my email address and contact details, right? So please do reach out to us, if we can answer any questions, and we will. There's a whole host of questions I know that we didn't get a chance to go through that we can directly address back within with your email addresses and such.
Your slide didn't change. Did you put the slide up for that Silverline?
Yes. How about now?
Okay, there it is. Yes.
Okay. All right. And by the way, I mean, if anyone is looking for a copy of these slides, right, just drop me an email and I can send them across to you as well. Okay. There's one last question that I know we are almost out of time, so I'll take one last question, which is pretty interesting, which is the question is that is there a scenario where you would use LLRP over EMDK? And the situation there would be that if you are using, let's say, other readers or other tags, or if you are, if you have a legacy application, right, where you need to, go after, legacy RFID readers and such, right? They all essentially work on the LLRP protocol, right? So, that capability or that ability is always there for you to be able to use that instead of, let's say, an EMDK, right? You can use, the LLRP capability there, the LTK toolkit using LLRP. The only difference is that, your application, now needs to do a little bit more additional work, and your application needs to control, that creation of message to be able to go talk to the reader, be able to do all of that fun stuff of getting the data and then close out the whole 9 yards, right? Whereas the EMDK essentially would give you, the same ability, right, in very few lines of code, right? That's really the big thing. But I mean, either one of those technology can be used. The recommendation is to use the EMDK, but LLRP is very much valid as well. Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Dino.
No, that's it. That's very good. Thank you.
All right. With that, so everyone, thank you for joining the webinar here. And if you have any questions, please do email me. I'm at pritesh.gupta@zebra.com, or look me up on our developer community at developer.zebra.com. And with that, we'll close out our webinar session today. And thank you all for joining. And hopefully we'll speak again in future soon. Bye.
Bye.